put together some speakers to reflect on inclusive entrepreneurship. So talking about how entrepreneurship can happen in prison or for immigrants, female and other marginalized groups or different groups, if you wish. So the panelists will also offer us some fresh studies ongoing and reflections about what inclusive entrepreneurship is and could be and would like to be, perhaps. The panel of today. So the idea is that obviously I don't have to tell you that AI is something that we actually are seeing significantly emerging every day. I look at myself some patents data through some text analysis about AI, different categories, and actually AI exists already since like 50 years as keywords in patents, if you wish, as what they were describing. But nowadays, of course, technology reached the next level. So it's really present. And so question for organizations and of any kind, large incumbents, startups, is what do we do with this, right? How do we create value? How can we get appropriate value? But also, obviously, there are some unintended consequences of this new technology, as any other, but this one seems to be very much explicit about what could be otherwise. And so we basically are trying to offer some questions to guide some discussion during this panel. We invited 3 speakers to reflect about this different perspective from a general ecosystem, if you wish, view. So incumbent, startup, but also investors, okay? So we're gonna have 3 panelists, Joshua Gans, Francesco Correa, and Rob Simmons, who is currently in New York. Unfortunately, COVID has been striking on his possibility to joining us, but we'll be on Zoom. And each of the panelists will have 15 minutes, and we're gonna keep the question in the end of the panel for all our panelists. So thank you for joining us. With no further ado, I would like to invite Joshua to take over. Thank you for joining. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
As we were talking about before, I'll get worried about AI when it can do this. Move and open a slide for a presentation. Then we'll know that AI is really a thing. But for the moment, we're all safe with our clear skills that we have. Is it? Yeah, fine.
Okay.
Well, right. So thanks everybody for getting up so early this morning. What I want to talk about is AI and entrepreneurial strategy. Oops, it's a little bit harder with this. So I've written a couple of books that are relevant for this talk. One is with Ajay Agarwal and Avi Goldfarb called Power of Prediction, which is about strategy for AI. And the other is a forthcoming book with Scott Stern and Erin Scott on entrepreneurial strategy that's coming out from Norton next year. We have this interesting setup here where it turns out that my slides are not here, they're over there, and I'm here because I have to. So, Power and Prediction. So the main takeaway of that book is that AI will be transformative when it moves from what we call point solutions to system solutions. What does that mean? Well, generally speaking, these transformative technologies, of which AI may well be one, sort of go through 3 sort of phases in terms of their adoption. Point solutions, so if you think back to an earlier technology like electricity, point solutions were where you used electricity and you just swapped it out, swapped it in for the previous source of power, which was usually steam and water power. And otherwise everything else remained the same. And that happened for the first few decades since the introduction of electricity. Then you started to see people develop what we'll call applications. With respect to electricity, it was being able to do individually electrical powered engine machine tools. And so they were started to get distributed. And then about 4 decades after Edison switched on the light bulb, we finally had electricity do its true transformation. And that was changing the system of production. And it really changed the system of production from these vertical factories to these very flat ones in outlying areas, and basically the Ford Model T production line and things like that. And so we saw that, and it's when that happened. No, we went from like 5% of businesses using electricity to all the way to eventually to 100% in rapid succession. But it took 4 decades for that to occur, which is sort of the mode for these things. We're seeing the same sort of thing now with AI. We've had for the past 5 years or so a lot of point solutions where we've taken artificial intelligence, which is essentially just computational statistics of prediction, and used it where we were already engaging in prediction. Those were the point solutions. So improved our econometrics and statistics, if you will. Now we're getting application solutions. That's what ChatGPT and the LLMs are. And actually, you won't ever hear Apple say the word artificial intelligence. I challenge you to find a time when they have. But they've got packed artificial intelligence in their Vision Pro that they're launching next year. Is packed with it. But we haven't seen any system solutions yet. There's no place where AI has been so enormous in its improvement that it has caused a redesign of a system. And you know, if other technology is anything to go by, that's a little ways off, still to come.
How about the steel-making production process that are applying AI now?
Yeah, they are. Although I think we'll leave the questions to the end, if that's okay. Yeah, no, for the panel. Okay. So, I want to marry that notion with the work we've done on entrepreneurship. And the key takeaway from that book will be that choice matters, that startup firms have very limited resources and lots of options. And so what they choose to do regarding their strategies to do with customer technology, competition organization, really matters. And moreover, the thesis of that book is that startup success is driven by identifying those choices that can create and capture value, and then selecting, and this is important, a learning process that surfaces the commitment requirements of those choices. In other words, when you choose something, is it cutting off other options or not? And what sort of flexibility is that leaving to you? Because learning is really very useful if you can actually change what you're doing. If you're stuck, learning doesn't help very much. And so various choices actually turn out to matter. I won't go into this in detail, but let me talk about the various choices that AI startups would face that we think are going to be very relevant in this space. First of all, there's a customer value proposition choice, whether you choose to be using AI to inform a decision or actually providing a tool that directly does stuff. And there's a bit of a distinction between that in terms of what it's wanting the person to do in that process. There's a machine learning method, supervised versus unsupervised, which mainly impacts on the data requirements that you would need to do each technique, so it's a choice of technology. There's labor. Are you trying to replace labor or complement it? Many startups sell themselves as saving labor costs. Others sell it as improving labor productivity. Those can be different things. You have issues of where your ML capabilities come from. It's an organizational choice. Do you develop things internally, or do you purchase some of those capabilities off the shelf? And you've got a competition element. What are you trying to, which market are you trying to compete with? Are you developing something that's foundational, or are you developing AIs that are operating at an application layer of these things? And finally, there's the issue of scale, which draws directly into the other book, which is, are you developing point solutions, or are you going for a system-wide solution, or are you looking to do that? And it turns out that startups have choices amongst all of those things. I'm going to give you an example of this, and just a warning regarding the picture I used just to demonstrate this. This is a picture. This is Linda LifeTech. This picture is of a technology that allows you to conduct breast cancer screening using essentially just a mobile phone with a heat-sensitive camera. And they've trained an AI algorithm that almost matches mammography in terms of picking up breast cancer candidates. So it's quite exciting, and you can imagine the minority of this room who might understand what a mammogram means. This is using a iPhone application would be far better, and of course you could do it more regularly than 6 months to a year, which is the current cadence. So there's real transformation that could come from this, and this is a company called Linda LifeTech that comes out of the Creative Destruction Lab here at the University of Toronto. So what would a company like this do? It's in the AI space. What are the choices it makes that you say, oh, that all looked very much like a good company right then and there. But actually there's a lot of choices going under the hood. And what we encourage our companies to do is to sort of do not just one strategy, but two, so that they have alternatives and can consider a choice between them. And so for Linda LifeTech, if we imagine that they had some dimensions of choice regarding competition, they could collaborate with incumbents, or they could compete with them, or they could focus on control, which is IP protection mostly, but other things like that, or they could focus on executing, which is trying to be a better quality product in the moment. Both are legitimate things. Linda LifeTech is currently pursuing one in this thing. It's trying to compete, and it's trying to be a very good app in this regard. There's IP around it, but its strategy is to actually be good. The alternative is it could take that AI technology, could license it to the incumbents, the mammography providers, who could then themselves use it as they will in their own systems. They could forget all that and build up an entirely new system for breast cancer screening based around this whole notion. Or alternatively, they could use the machine learning screening as an additional tool in existing systems. And these are sort of options available to them. In our work, these options actually map into the literature through disruptive strategy, which they're currently pursuing, intellectual property strategy, which was the licensing option, architectural, which is building out an entire new system, and value chain, which is, I expect, where they're going to end up for regulatory purposes, but that's another matter. But they had all these options, and they all involve very different ways of approaching the business, even initially, on the core tech. And those choices feed all the way down to the choices I said earlier about what the AI itself is being designed to do, those other choices. One of the roles that guides this, that we think is critical, and this will ask to talk about things for research, is the role in mentorship in guiding those choices. So we have the Creative Destruction Lab here, which I won't be able to go into, but it provides a 9-month effective mentorship program for startup firms. And this is something we've studied. I've got a paper on with Jay Agrawal and Scott Stern, merging my co-authors from these other projects further, on how to enable entrepreneurial choice. And I also saw a paper presented just here at Toronto by Jack Fraser and Pinar Ozgam, who actually took observations of 150 hours worth of text recordings from the Creative Destruction Lab that's at Oxford, and examined 7 startups and the advice they got in the AI space, and started to distill some of these patterns regarding supervised versus unsupervised learning, generative AI versus predictions, things like that. And so there's works now beginning to understand what is driving these choices, and hopefully that'll lead to other work in terms of the sorts of things that also enable startup success. And so I think AI is going to be an interesting area for this, not only because so much startup activity is occurring, but also because AI itself, as a technology, being the one we have right now that is so transformative, has some really interesting and common dimensions of the choices that people are facing, that we might actually be able to get a decent sample size to work out what's actually occurring. So that could be pretty exciting there. I add on one thing, just by way of advertising, the 2 books that you saw up there. You don't have to read those books anymore because we've had an AI do it. Kevin Bryan, my colleague Kevin Bryan, has coded, actually he used ChatGPT to code, we call it an all-day TA, where it's trained on the books we've done and it uses the OpenAI LLM, and it can ask you can ask it any questions regarding these topics, and it will give you answers and point you to the place in the book where if you want to read further. So that's just by way of preview that, you know, it's not just research, but a lot of other things that might start impacting us in this space. That's it. Thank you. I'll hand back to
Rob, can you hear everything?
I heard you.
Okay.
I heard Joshua.
Okay,
You want me to share my
that's
screen?
everything so far.
Perfect. Can you maybe share your slides? It's perfect.
Okay, so anytime, floor is yours.
Floor is mine? Okay. Alrighty. Thank you to the organizers for accommodating me not being there. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I'm glad to be there virtually and in spirit. So the comments that I have, they actually follow very nicely from one of the points that Joshua was making. This is going to sort of, this agenda right here is going to sort of guide the things I want to talk about. So let me just spend a moment on this. So the puzzle is that there's lots of adoption of AI, but so far limited evidence of payoff, particularly when you talk to firms. You know, there's some evidence of frustration that they have with this technology that gets a lot of airtime, but you know, it's not totally clear what the financial benefit is to them. And so the solution that I'm going to propose is you could look at the recent experience of robots, which have been around a little bit longer. We have some things that we can learn from robots. Robots, of course, are different from AI. We can talk about those differences if needed. But the proposal is we can look at the recent experience of robots, and then from that, we can generalize a little bit to AI. Here are the findings. Investments in robots lead to a payoff. It takes time, but here's the payoff, both increased growth. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, we see that actually at the macroeconomic level. And I'm going to describe a few papers to you that find that at the firm level, that firms that invest in robots, maybe perhaps not surprisingly, experience performance benefits. And also, interestingly, it looks like they experience employment growth, but only if these firms also make complementary investments. And so these complementary investments or investments in complementary assets, that's really going to be sort of the big theme of the comments that I have to make. And so the implications are when investing in AI, firms also need to be making these complementary investments in human, physical, and digital capital. Okay, so I'm actually just going to zoom through. I'm actually not going to do any of this. I'm just going to, I think, this audience is probably pretty familiar with this, right? We have AI, lots of commercialization, some frustration at least from the point of view of the business community about actually what's happening with this technology. Okay, so stepping back in history, we know that, if you look at all the prior general purpose technologies, if we want to use that term, or just think of them as, big sort of transformative technologies. They've all been associated with economic growth. They've also been associated with employment growth and or at least better employment, better jobs. So you can look at steam engines, you can look at electricity, you could look at, computer and the internet. Now, what's interesting, though, is that this growth takes time. And you heard Joshua make some very similar comments about that a moment ago, right? He was talking about the point solution, all the way to sort of the system solutions. At the level of the firm, however, and this is going to be sort of the focus of the rest of the comments I have to make. At the level of the firm, what's interesting is that even if you have a very specific application in mind, it takes time. These technologies are not necessarily plug and play. And so Paul David has this interesting study of U.S. manufacturing firms, mostly the ones he was studying, I believe, were mostly based in the Midwest, switching from steam power to electricity power. And on average, it would take them 5 years before they saw any productivity gains from that switch. Why is it? Well, it's because electricity is not plug and play with steam, right? You can't just unplug the steam and sort of plug in the electricity, and then you're off to the races. As Joshua mentioned, actually, in order to take advantage of the things that electricity can do well, you have to rearrange factories. Instead of being these vertical ones where there'd be this spinning shaft powering everything, it works much better if you have things laid out horizontally. So plug and play. So let's turn. So they're not plug and play. So let's turn to robots. Turns out the same thing happens with robots. The technology is not plug and play. Sorry, I'll come to that in a moment. So what do we know about robots? There have been a bunch of recent papers on robots. Of course, the firms that adopt them, no surprise, you see an increase in, on average, you see an increase in performance following the adoption of robots. I say no surprise because otherwise, why would the firms be adopting these robots? Perhaps what's a bit surprising, because it runs counter to the common narrative in the popular press, is that actually all these firms that adopt robots, you do see a subsequent increase in employment at these firms. I've noted a few of the papers here. I just want to highlight the one that's in the middle there, Dixon, Hong, and Wu. You all are in Canada, and so I think that's a nice paper to highlight. They're using data on Canadian firms, Canadian manufacturing firms that adopt robots. And then again, these firms that adopt robots, they see subsequent performance growth and also subsequent employment growth. Okay. However, these robots are not plug and play. So what do I mean by plug and play? You can't just sort of take out the human, if you will, and plug in the robot. So let me explain that a little bit. This is from a visit that I've done of a manufacturing firm, and I've visited maybe about a dozen manufacturing firms over the last half a dozen years, let's say. This is from Cleveland, Ohio. This company is called Soundwich. They're part of the automotive production chain. So they do not produce autos themselves. They sit upstream from the auto manufacturers, and they make parts that they then ship to the auto manufacturers. The specific parts that this company makes are metal parts that they stamp. They stamp parts that are, as big as this, it's about the size of my hand, to things that are the size of a car door. So they do stamping for car doors. In any case, this production process here is making a very small piece that actually sits on the inside of the car door, and it helps to buffer sound between the roadway and the cabin of the car. And this, by the way, is their specialty, these sort of sound buffering pieces of metal, hence their name, Soundwich. Okay, so they've purchased a robot, and you see this robotic arm right here, but they're not done, right? You don't just purchase a robot and then you're off to the races. Instead, you have to make a whole bunch of other complementary investments, okay? And I'm going to be calling these complementary assets. So there's this appendage at the end of the robotic arm. You can see a whole bunch of little sensors here. This is now just over here on the right-hand side. This is just a slightly different vantage point. But by the way, it's very hard to take pictures of these. We're in these very big warehouses that are not very well lit, and there's sort of cages around everything. It's not really conducive to taking great pictures. In any case, you can see various sensors here, video cameras and things like that. A bunch of wires running behind the machine. I'm coming back over to the picture on the left. All those wires run into some computer systems that they have here, and there's a monitor here. They have to invest into some specific software that helps them figure out whether there are defects and things like that in the pieces that they're making. This gentleman here didn't used to work at the company he does now. He has a very specific set of specialized human capital. He understands the production process, and he can troubleshoot when that starts to break down. He understands the robots and what they're supposed to do. And he can understand the software. And he's one of the folks that actually sort of built out the specialized software that they need. So a very specialized sort of intersection of human capital. So in any case, the point here is a firm can't just purchase a robot. You have to make all these other complementary investments. They can be highly specialized, right? So I've been highlighting that with the individual there. They're also really expensive. So on average for robots, if you spend $30,000 on a robotic arm, and these robotic arms are $30,000, on average, if you spend $30,000 on a robotic arm, you should expect to spend an additional $60,000 to $90,000 on all of these complementary assets. Some of the places that I visited could be $45,000 for an arm, and then $450,000 for all of these complementary assets. So it's not a trivial investment. Okay, so investments in robots lead to payoff, but only if the firm makes these complementary investments. And hence, the argument is, when investing in AI, firms also need to be making these complementary investments in human, physical, and digital capital. And these take time, and this is likely part of the reason why firms have not been experiencing the payoff from their investment in AI. A paper that I quite like that makes this point with predictive analytics, so again, not AI, but maybe a little closer to that relative to robots, is a paper by Eric Brynjolfsson and Christina McElhern. Christina might actually be there in the room. If you are, hi, Christina. I certainly know her colleague, at least one of her colleagues is in the room. And so what they find is that this is US manufacturing firm, I believe it's manufacturing firms that invest in predictive analytics, on average experience performance gains. This is the y-axis over here, but it's really those firms that actually that don't just invest in predictive analytics, but also that also make these investments in complementary assets that could be additional IT, could be educated workers, so highly specialized human capital. It also could be new types of production processes and things like that. Okay, so again, you need to be making these investments in complementary assets in order to get the benefit of your investment in a new technology. Okay, so what are these complementary assets? I think it's a great question, and I don't know. I mean, specialized human capital seems to be really important, but I think that what these complementary assets are for any given firm or any given setting is gonna differ. And I think that this is sort of a ripe area for a lot of folks to be doing research in. I have speculated a bit on this. I have also, since I don't have an answer, I have come up with more questions. And so this is my last slide. It's a bunch of research questions around complementary assets. Okay, so I do think that this topic of complementary assets or investing in complementary assets is critical to understanding conditions under which firms benefit from adoption of AI. However, what these complementary assets are in any given setting, I think is something that needs to be explored more. I'm not going to read through these questions. I'm just sort of leaving them up. This is my last slide, Astrid, so I'll just stop there.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm aware that I'm like the last thing that divides you from coffee or the next talk. So I'm trying to be like as brief as possible, especially after like those two very nice presentations. So my name is Francesco Correa, and I run like the data science practice at Greycroft, which is a VC fund. Generalist fund based in New York and LA, recently also in the Bay Area. So we've been in the US for about like 20 years now, doing investments pretty much anywhere, any stage, pre-seed to pre-IPO, any sector. Joined the company about like a year ago. And I've been honestly working in data and venture for the last 5 or 6 years. Because this is actually like a new thing. I mean, like it wasn't there 10 years ago. Still good? Still good? Okay, cool. Wasn't there 10 years ago, is start becoming a thing right now for a bunch of different reasons. I'm telling you like why in a second. I want you to start looking at these slides to start with. This is actually something got from HBR that some of you might be familiar with. Maybe you've seen like the paper. this is on average how venture capitalists spend their time on a daily and weekly basis. So the majority of us, well, the work week might vary depending on where you are, but the majority of us spend a good chunk of time, let's say about like 90%, either finding companies, supporting existing companies, or networking. So what does it tell you? And I don't want to go like too much into details there, but the main message is that the majority of what we do is still very, very people-driven. There is little data, and is incredibly labor-intensive. So historically speaking, this industry hasn't been like innovating in the last 50 years. So we've been doing like the same thing since the 70s. You go to conferences, you meet startups, accelerator programs, same thing, all over. Now this is changing right now, slightly and slowly, but it's hard, and it's hard because there is not like a Bloomberg for data. I can't like simply like plug and play something and get access to every single startup data, right? And data are usually missing, they are incomplete, there are gaps, there is no time series, they're not verified, companies go bankrupt, and there is no filing. So you might have like a live data point that you think is live, but in fact the company is there like for like 6 months or something. So how we see optimize for this? They usually create specific heuristics to solve issues and to invest in companies. Some of those are smarter than others. The only problem is that you don't know if you're right, if not after 10 years. Because that's like the normal life of a startup from inception to IPO. It's like 8 years on average. Like right now it's getting longer because there's been like more private money in the last few years, but it's like something between like 8 and 12, right? And the normal life of a VC fund is 10 years. So usually you invest in a company, you hope that everything goes well, you wait 10 years, and then maybe you get back some money, right? So my main question there was like, can I do something to optimize this process with AI, ML, you name it, call it whatever you feel like, because everyone has like a different wording here. And clearly I wouldn't be here if I thought that was impossible. So my answer is yes, but it's not that easy. And this is a classic investment process, right? And again, to reiterate the point, it's incredibly broken, it's super manual, it's inefficient, it has like a lot of biases throughout the different steps. The reality here is that, so if you divide it like in 4 or 5 macro blocks, the things that everyone right now is focusing on is the first 2, so sourcing and screening. There are different reasons for that, like, and we can go like more in details if you want, but the long story short is everyone wants to find the next Facebook, right? That's the only reason why we do investments. There might be an impact on society and a bunch of other things, but the bottom line is we want to find the next big companies. But it's also like the easiest thing to do, because when you start like gathering data in a specific way, running models on structured data, going back to your point, it's way easier. So point 3, 4, 5, whatever, they were very hard until like 12 months ago. So if you had to build like an automated system for competition analysis or to write an investment memo or whatever you wanted, 12 months ago it was hell. It was very hard. Right now, it basically took me like 20 minutes. So like right now, there are systems that can actually like classify companies for you, make you like a competitive map, write the investment memo. So as you might understand from a productivity standpoint, this thing would allow you to run an entire venture firm from 60 people with probably like half of it. But for the sake of, so like after all this, for the sake of this presentation, I'm just gonna focus on like on the first 2, and I'll tell you why after. But so why this is like important right now? As I said before, it's a bit of a different things coming together. So one is like there is more data right now. So you can get your hands on data that comes from credit card and website and app and GitHub, product reviews, you name it. And I'm not simply mumble jumbling here. There are like real things that we use, right? But it's also true that only a few of us have specific data science departments and specific people that run these things in venture funds, and there are like economics reasons for that. Regardless of how much you manage, it's very hard to find those people. It's very hard to retain them, and honestly, it doesn't make any sense like for small funds. So like something like below 150 million AUM. There are a few works that prove that these things has an efficiency impact on funds, and also that reduces biases, which is something that as an industry we've been like struggling with for the last 20 years. So the way in which we allocate capital is not always, incredibly fair, and that's not, I guess, because we are bad people, but because like those heuristics that we built in the last like 20, 25 years always bring you to give money to specific type of entrepreneurs or companies that are somehow more likely to succeed, whatever that means. So right now we are in these transitions where there are the one on the left side that we would call, for the sake of this presentation, like old school VCs. That are VCs that are still like stuck in that kind of workflows that I talked about before. So very manual. The tools are old, between quotes, tools. They have very basic CRMs, Salesforce, emails, Slack, WhatsApp, you name it. An increasing number of venture funds, they are moving toward what we call productivity VCs, which are people that use tools off the shelf, but that are tools that are specialized for or that are optimized for the venture workflow. So if you are familiar with the industry, Affinity is one of those tools. There are portfolio tools and a bunch of other things that you can play with and integrate, and specific data that you can buy, so PitchBook, Crunchbase, whatever it is. The last bucket here is actually people that are building things internally. And again, as I said before, this doesn't happen that frequently. Only like a small subset of funds have specific data science team. And if you belong to the last group, you tend to build over buying. So instead of buying 20 different tools, you might buy 10 and build 10, which is, again, not that common in our industry yet. So what can you do with AI, and who are these funds that are using AI today? On the left side, you see like the median data-driven VC profile. So it's usually like a fund that has been around for a while. It's a fund that has like a specific amount of money under management. Otherwise, it won't be able to buy data, to hire people, to build systems, to maintain them. He has like, about like 40 employees or something more, and at least like a couple of engineers. So usually when I call it like engineers, but it's data / engineers people. So usually when you start building a team, you build a small team, and it's very hard to go like over like 3, 4, or 5 people. It's often the case that you get stuck at one, but usually like the average is like 3 people. And on the right-hand side, you see like a bunch of different use cases that are like real use cases that people are optimizing for today. So using AI to spotting general trends. So you can use like, AdWords or search trends, like to try to understand where the market is going or what people are looking for these days. Market gaps, same thing. Portfolio management, matching co-investor in deals. So if you're like a large enough data sets, you already know who is like the more or like the most likely investors that can partner up with you, like in a specific round or a follow-on round. Competitor landscape, I already talk about it. Technically speaking, you can also identify potential acquirers for your companies when the time comes. Sourcing, really talk about it. The last point is like the only thing that we're not really doing in the industry, which is It's probably something that you guys should be solving for. We don't have like new models for valuation and pricing. So this is still like the same thing for like the same models that we'll be like running over and over. So I don't know how much time I have. I think that I'm like already a bit over it. But okay, so I structure these things like in two ways. I could stop here or I could go ahead. So okay, whatever, it's fine. Are you okay with that? Okay, cool. So my whole idea here is that it's becoming more and more important, and it will probably become like a source of like competitive advantage for funds in the next 5 to 10 years. We're not there yet for a bunch of different reasons. But my first approach to this was like probably like 5 years ago, when I started like building a bunch of this like integration between data sets and so on and so forth. And my initial idea was, can I create a smart checklist for funds? So something that you can go through, which is not as biased as other processes, that, you know, everything else being equal can tell you whether a company is going to be more successful or not. Very ambitious. I'm not sure I've done it. I've done like specific points of this, you know, macro research question kind of thing. And I'll show you very briefly what that means, just for the sake of completeness. I'm not showing you our own models. I'm showing you something that I published in the last 5 years. But the reality is that the models that we built, they draw inspiration from this work. So the 2 papers that I have are online, so if you want to read them, feel free to. But there are like, well, there is like at least in one of these 2 papers, a very large review of studies that have you know, investigated either like direct impact on likelihood of success or indirect through deal formation or through company valuation. Why? Because if you raise money, you are more likely to succeed, and if you raise money at a higher valuation, you are more likely to succeed. This is like the slide that I somehow like the most, because like it tells you how hard this problem is without really telling you. So it kind of into, and maybe like some of you like just like you're just gonna start working on this stuff without realizing like that the data it's a mess. But the data sets that we work with are incredibly inaccurate, and there is very little way to verify them. And the other macro problem that we have is that success means different things to different people. So it could be like get to the next round of funding. It could be exiting the companies for a higher, you know, price that you paid for. It could be creating jobs or opening offices or like having like an impact on environment, whatever it is, right? Usually in both in academia, but the way that we look at these things is success is either getting to the next round or exiting the companies. Clearly the model changes depending on what you are measuring against. But for the sake of this model, it's one of these 2 things. So exiting either through acquisition or IPO, or getting to the next round. Now, without getting too much into like the technicality of this, and again, it's all online, so you can read it and crush it as much as you want. But the story around this model is that we got a couple of different data sets, pulled it together. It was like about 600,000 startups that we analyzed. And this work specifically was like from 2019, 2020, I guess. Build a world map and a simulation study in, you know, in a period of like 7 years, 3 years for world map and 4 years for simulation. And built about like 250 variables to, you know, run this model. And the reality is, we tested different models. So this is more like from a machine learning application type of area. So we tested different models like from decision tree, random forest, gradient tree boosting, SVM, blah, blah, blah. And the reality is like there are specific models that work better in this case, or that work best, I would say. And again, I would encourage you, if you have time, to go through the paper, because it's probably more detailed than this slide. But the reality is that it is possible to use some of this model to skim through your variables and find specific predictors for success. Is that super accurate-ish? So this has to be taken with a word of caution, because the reality is this model doesn't tell you where to invest. It tells you that everything else being equal, if two companies are exactly the same, but one company shows one of this specific feature, in that case, it's more likely to succeed. Why? Because people tend to think that you get these things, you apply that, and you're gonna have like a recipe for success. This is not the case, unfortunately. So you need to play with this data and conclusion very carefully. I'll skip very quickly, but the reality is this work has been developed far, and then there are like more variables that we identified, and this is like a super small framework that we built back in the days, like a couple of years ago, that shows you in a very binary way. So there is no like magnitude or impact of each variable, but it tells you what are the relevant variables that you can look at to score companies. And again, this was like a way for me to answer that initial questions of like, can I create a smart checklist that I can look at every single time that I want to do like an investment. I will wrap it up as Rob with some final thoughts / open question to myself, I guess, and to all of you. So the long story short is, no one here is trying to replace venture. It's not that it's too hard. It's just that like the way in which the system works doesn't allow that right now. So everyone is trying to optimize for augmenting associate and principals in a venture firm. So finding ways to do more with less. It is true also that the majority of us prefer build over buying. If you have someone that runs data in a company, it tends to build new things rather than like buying stuff off the shelf. But it's also true that some of these things that we buy are or that we build are built on top of open source model. So the LLM things that are coming out these days are best thing ever for all of us, because it gave us like an edge that we wouldn't have like otherwise like 12 months ago. I think that I'm gonna leave it here because the other points are gonna opening up more questions for later. But hope that was like clear enough. And if not, again, papers are online. We're gonna be here for 25 more minutes. Okay, cool. I'm done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so thank you for the wonderful contribution from Rob, Joshua from more the academic side, and from Francesco, kind of an insight as a practitioner coming from venture financing. She's certainly reflecting heavily on the use of data and AI solution. And welcome now a question from the audience. Yeah, coming. They told me to speak very close.
Okay. Thank you so much. What a great way to wake up and start this conference. You were all fantastic. So the last presenter, I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, but really interesting to see what venture capitalists are doing. I do work in the sphere of accelerators, and so it's certainly closely tied. A lot of what I saw you focusing on were type 2 errors. Have you thought much about type 1 errors, in the sense that if you look at venture capital, one of the key factors that can lead to success is not making bad investments? And so have you framed the question in that way, and does that change how you approach the problem?
Thank you so much. Maybe we can collect a few questions and
Sure.
yeah, thank you. That was really
Hi, good morning. Let me join the compliments. Indeed, a great way to start the week. So, a question to Josh. And I maybe quoting you to you. But when the internet started, we were all excited by email replacing fax machines and physical messengers, people that actually picked up documents from your office and took it somewhere else. Little did we know that we were going to summon a car or see our friends or meet our spouse using internet applications. And one of the things I find most insightful in your work is this distinction between point solutions, application solutions, and system solutions. Now, you mentioned that this is one of the choices that firms can make. But if I take Rob seriously, the peripheral investment, the complementary investments in a simple point application of AI are so enormous that maybe we are destined to start with point solution. We cannot simply skip ahead and go straight to application or system solutions. So do you see a sequence of investment? Do you see this as evolution, or do you see that as a choice?
Thank you. Maybe last one. Before we start to address.
Yeah, I'm working on the future of competitive strategy, and the argument of a group of scholars here is that our research should be more future-oriented and solution-oriented. So can you please explain how you arrived to this taxonomy of solutions, point, system, applications? It's new for me. I have many definitions of solutions, to be honest, 100, but I was not aware of this one.
Thank you. So maybe, yeah, Francesco, please. Yeah, just you can start. Thank you.
Let me take up. Is this on? Okay, it's on. Well, it should be on. We'll assume it's on. Therefore, if you can hear me, it's on. So let's just follow up on the three questions. The first regarding complementary assets. Are we destined to do point solutions initially? Of course, we are. They have differing degrees of complementary assets, even in that regard. The robot solutions that I think that Rob was putting out there were beyond just simple point solutions going on. So I think there's a different degree of that. But you are correct. There's a sense in which, yes, it seems that envisaging a new system is harder. However, in the same way that Netflix started with a simple solution, DVD by mail, before moving to its entire new system, that can still be on your horizon of how you're building to it. And how we do that is a complicated thing. And in terms of the solutions, point solutions versus system solutions, I think that terminology we decided to use in this particular book, but I think that it probably maps into a lot of things that people have been talking about historically for some time. And I just want to say one thing about the venture capital type 1, type 2 errors. The whole issue with these models of trying to prove success in venture capital is we already know what the distribution looks like, and it's very right-tailed. And in other words, what you get your money on is the sort of surprising or exceptional ventures rather than others. And it's very hard to predict what's surprising and exceptional. But there's another way of looking at it. It's very easy to predict what is not surprising and not exceptional. So you would be able to actually filter out your results, I think, in those models by saying, well, these look kind of ordinary. Now, you may not, something being surprising, exceptional may be really good or very bad, but at least you get a head start that way.
Thank you, Joshua.
Yeah, so it's great when someone answer for you. So there is not that much that I need to say more, but I'm just adding one thing. It's completely right about it. So right about the model, right about the distributions. The next thing is the portfolio allocation in general and the way that these things work. The reality is the majority of VC funds don't care too much about not doing bad investments as soon as you do the right ones. Because the right ones, they have to be big enough to outpace everything else. So if you get that one right, you don't care about the next 20. split in a way. So it's not doing bad, not saying that this is like the right approach. This is like the thing that has been like around for the last like 50 years. This is like how the system works. And this is how portfolio allocations are built in VC funds usually. So like every single investment that you do, you need to think that it has to have the potential to return at least half of the fund. So if you are like $1 billion fund, every investments have to at least have the potential to return 500 million, which means exiting for 10 billion, right?
Can I make a comment?
Yeah. You're sounding a lot like an incumbent.
Yeah, just real quick. So I actually have a question for Joshua. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. So a question for Joshua is I would love to hear you speculate about where we might see some of these system solutions.
That's a whole bigger question. You can hear me, Rob? Yep. Yes. Well, the unscientific part of the Power and Prediction book is rampant and uninformed speculation on what can possibly, there's no way someone like me could possibly know, which is what are the system solutions. However, where would you look? So if you take into account what is AI doing? AI is essentially a prediction machine. It's informing decisions. When you didn't have AI to inform decisions, what would you do? You'd opt for what we'd call rules. You'd accept that I'm not going to be able to know, and you just choose the best thing that will lead to the least expected errors. And moreover, because you are dealing with uncertainty, you engage in a lot of activities to insulate yourself from those errors. So in much the same way as you, like with buildings, we don't know whether buildings are, are they built strong enough? Are they going to sustain weather, etc.? So we have a whole lot of building codes. And the building codes essentially over-engineer all the buildings. So in other words, we're worried about all these terrible consequences of buildings falling down, etc. So we tend to over-engineer them. I'm not saying this is going to be an application, but if you had great prediction of some of these sorts of things, you need not do that. You can tailor buildings more for their type, style, situation, length, materials, etc., and optimize over that. But right at the moment, because we've been dealing with systems, which have this edifice of insulation from uncertainty built around them, my suspicion is we can't even see where the opportunities are to apply AI to get rid of some of those inefficiencies. And so Rob probably knows that I've already written about this. For instance, when you're going back to wherever you're going and you sit in the airport terminal and you think about the airport terminals you used to sit in 20 years ago, and you see this is much more pleasant to wait in these ones now, for the most part. Even LaGuardia is much more pleasant to wait. And you think, why is that the case? It's the case because the airports gave up. They gave up on the one job that they had, which is to get you in and out of the airport very quickly. They now realize you're going to wait, and so they want you to make sure that's as pleasant as possible, and they invest billions of dollars in these nice terminals to make it so. If I developed an AI that could predict exactly when you needed to arrive to the airport to minimize the time you were staying in the airport, that would all be gone. But right at the moment, that would be a risk to those assets. And right at the moment, the take up for that AI and some of the risks associated in getting there and seeing that it works is not worth it because we've got this alternative system. So with respect to AI, where I think we're going to find these new systems is precisely when someone develops an AI that says we now don't have to do all of this other crap that we've been doing for years. And the interesting thing is, right now you can see plausible reasons why it'd be hard to identify those things.
Question there.
Hi all, thank you so much for the insightful presentations. So I have a question directed to Francisco, but I would love to hear thoughts of the other panelists as well. So I was curious about the role of data in providing competitive advantage in adoption of AI and machine learning techniques. So it really appears here that having proprietary data, like high quality data, could be critical in gaining competitive advantage. So do you think that it's sort of lack of data or lack of proprietary data could become like a barrier to adoption for entrant VCs, or maybe just like VCs who are startups, like just starting up? So thank you.
Thank you.
It's a complex question, and I'm trying to answer in a simple way. So I'm gonna lose some nuances here, but so there are two things. So you write about like prop data. So if you have your own data, that's an edge. Now collecting the data takes time. So not everyone has high proprietary data right now. You can buy a lot of things, but they're very expensive. So like buying data these days, it's incredibly expensive. You can scrape a few of these things, but it's hard. Everything to say that you're right. So having specific type of data will give you an advantage. That doesn't prevent anyone to entering the VC ecosystem without having data, because luckily enough, there is like enough investment thesis, enough managers, enough startups, enough geographies to be able to run a VC fund in a different way and say, you know what, I don't want to do like 200 investments in my lifetime. I only want to do like pick 10, and I only want to invest in longevity companies, only in Israel, because that's the market I know. And in that case, the reality is, if you are based there, if you know the people, you don't really need to build massive systems. You can potentially going around with your team all day long, every single day, every single week, and meet everyone. And eventually, you're gonna have like those data points in your head, right? It's not like a satisfactory answer for you, I guess, but the answer is like yes and no.
Joshua, would you like to add something? It's fine.
Yeah, so thank you. So, yeah, Luca.
So thank you very much for all interesting presentation. I just have a question, maybe playing the David advocates here. So we know that AI is very exciting technology. It's being, the diffusion with ChatGPT is being crazy. But do you think it's a very different technology from what we've seen in the past? I mean, the internet in general, or, even blockchain. Do you think we can learn something new from AI or the adoption of AI, even in terms of, for strategy and entrepreneurship, for example?
I get another one. Okay, so Getty.
Hi, thank you very much for a fascinating panel. Definitely worth waking up. I maybe kind of dovetailing on the question over here. One of the things we know, I think, from many of you guys, is that when we shift from atoms to bits, the whole economics of things differ. The marginal cost of reproducing something else is fundamentally different, and that explains a lot of what we've seen in high-tech industry compared to traditional industries. When I'm thinking about Rob's calibration of 400,000 in complementary assets to 40,000 per robot, when I think about many of the examples that you've given, those were atom-based industries. To what extent do we expect these analogies to apply, maybe not in robots, but in RPA, robotic process automation, all these automated rejection emails that you know? And even furthermore, as we are moving into a world that is really bits-based and not atom-based, how can we learn from the past to infer about what the effect will be in the future? Thanks.
Thank you, Gary. So maybe Rob, we give you the chance to take the first stab to this set of questions. Assuming that you heard them.
Sorry, did somebody ask me something?
So you didn't hear any question? Okay. So you didn't hear any question?
I heard the question, but I don't hear whoever is talking right now. Or So
No, yeah, I was asking you if you want to take the first stab in addressing this round of questions.
well, okay, I'll be honest. I'm getting like bits and pieces.
Okay. Okay, so maybe we give to Joshua. Okay, no, go ahead, please. No, please go ahead.
No, so I'm getting bits and pieces, and I mean, it's there is a theme running, I think, running through the last couple of questions, which is around, is AI fundamentally different from stuff in the past? So, some question as to what we can learn from the past. I think that's, yes, the technology, let's say, is different from in the past. However, the economic backdrop, let's say, against which the technology is being commercialized is really, really similar to the economic backdrop against which robots have been commercialized. So while the technologies themselves are very different, and I take the point about that, atom-based versus not atom-based or bits-based or something like that, I think it's, one can still reasonably infer about the extent to which firms might be affected by the adoption of this technology, or society affected by the adoption of this technology. Again, given that the economic backdrop is very similar. And so what do I mean about the economic backdrop? I don't want to get too far away from maybe the subject of this session, but it might be things like the competitive environment, right? So the extent to which firms are more or less concentrated, right? Economic activity more or less concentrated, let's say, in fewer firms relative to more firms perhaps in the recent past. Another might be labor market frictions, right? Maybe it's harder now for people to switch jobs or something like that. And so you might worry about how difficult it is to train or retrain people into some of the specialized human capital that I was talking about earlier, right? And so I was talking about that true with respect to robots, but I think a lot of the same stuff would apply to specialized human capital that you need to take advantage of what it is that AI can do. So I was trying to hit on a few different things there, but and I don't know if I totally missed, maybe I totally missed it. But anyway, I'll turn it over to Joshua, I guess, who will then clarify everything I was trying to say.
Yeah, so I'm in the business, I think, of understanding the economics of innovation and telling anyone who asks those sorts of questions, there's nothing new. It's just changing the label of the technology, and then we can understand it. I know that's a bit of a blanket statement, but if you look under the hood of everything that I'm doing, that's what's there. It's saying that the same basic tools apply. We just swap it out, and every new technology that comes around, I try to reduce from its exciting point, artificial intelligence, to its uninteresting point, a drop in the cost of computational statistics, which, let me tell you, if we had labeled our book The Economics of Computational Statistics, I wouldn't be sitting here.
I'll just add the final comment to answer your question, but you probably remember Deep Blue and Kasparov, right? Back in the days. 2014, there was like the DeepMind thing. So DeepMind challenge at Go, Lee Sedol. There was like, back then, like the world champion, like the biggest and best world champion ever, right? The funny thing is that if you watch the games, or if you watch the summaries of the games, it was like the best out of 5 games, right? First game, boring. It's like the human lost. Nothing exciting, easy. Game number 2, move 37. That's the moment that Lee Sedol started losing the game. And after, if you watch the interviews, it will say the machine did something that I would never expect, and that a human would never do. And that's not like where like the entire game goes to waste, doesn't know what to do, loses the game. Game 3 is still like completely lost. It's like nothing strange happened. By the way, Lee Sedol lost 4-1, right? So he only won 1 game. The only game that he won was game number 4. Move 78, he basically replicated the scheme of playing that the computer did like on game number 2. It did something that no one else thought that it could be possible, that it should have been done, and anything else. Same behavior, and he actually he was able to beat the machine. So to answer your question, is there anything that how is that different? I think it's different. I think that it's one of the few pieces of technology of the last I don't know how many years that we can really learn something from, and not even get into the Gen AI, LLM things.
So thank you so much with this is very nice example anecdote to end the session. So, but first of all, thank you, Rob, for joining us, and we wish you a quick recovery, and Francesco for joining, and of course for Joshua. Thank you everybody for joining. I hope you enjoyed the session, and Asito for organizing. Absolutely. Thank you so much.